Nicole thought she had learned to get up after every fall when the moment of parting with Ted finally faded into the darkness of memory. A darkness that no longer stabbed straight into her chest every morning when she woke up. She told herself she was strong enough to no longer return to the days of waiting, no longer wear down her self-esteem by hoping someone else would choose her instead of choosing herself. Then Carlton appeared as a timely desire. A calm, talented colleague who accompanied Ted during surgeries, but who was different from Ted in the softness of his listening, in the way he remembered every little detail related to her, from her habit of drinking black coffee after a shift to her secret fear of entering an empty room after a long day. To Carlton, Nicole was no longer someone's shadow. She was put first, given priority in seemingly meaningless yet confident choices. A hasty dinner in his kitchen, a text message asking how he was doing in the middle of the night, a look that was both resolute and gentle at the door of the operating room as they both pulled up their masks and exchanged a nod. The relationship quickly deepened, as if they had both gone through a lifetime of being lost to each other to now fit together with each breath, opening up a sky that Nicole called in her heart the possibility of peace. That rare peace made her believe that this time, perhaps she really was the one chosen first. No longer the last alternative, no longer something that came after work, after fame, or after an unfulfilled promise. But life has a way of tearing the curtain of happiness the moment people accidentally lie down. The climax came on a seemingly ordinary afternoon. The hospital was noisy from the emergency room. The front yard was full of patient transport vehicles. Nicole emerged from the conference room, still holding the surgical schedule in her hand. A strange woman, tired but with the bright eyes of someone who had traveled a long journey, stood in her way. Next to her were two children, a girl with her hair tied up high and a boy clutching a backpack like a life preserver. The woman asked her if she was Nicole. Then she introduced herself, a name Nicole had heard Carlton say only once, so softly that she thought she had misheard. She was calm, breathing evenly, and seemed to squeeze both love and pride into one sentence. She was Carlton's legal wife. The two children were theirs. They had only come to Los Angeles because they needed to talk things out. All Nicole saw in her mind was a slippery white space where the pieces of Carlton fell and shattered, unable to be collected, unable to make sense. A sharp voice rang out inside her. First choice had turned out to be an illusion built on dishonesty. The breach not only tore apart trust, it dragged Nicole into a quagmire both public and private. News of the wife and two children spread like a breeze through the hospital corridors, into sensation-loving ears, through staff lunches and conversations at the coffee machine. Carlton, whose colleagues had always seen as a skilled doctor, the one who stayed late to review medical records, was now juxtaposed with the figure of a man who split two worlds. But what made the tragedy even more heartbreaking was the way he bent down to tie his son's shoelaces when he kicked them off in his haste. The way he placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder to reassure her as she hid behind her mother. He was a kind father, despite the fact that his kindness was bleeding Nicole's soul. The children watched innocently, unaware that with each step they drew a line between the past and present of the woman standing there. In their eyes, Nicole saw herself in miniature. Fragile, innocent, waiting for someone to choose her with a simple truth. But Carlton did not do so. The confrontation was inevitable. Unexpectedly, they were all drawn into a vortex of wordless dialogue, where every look, every gesture replaced a question. Nicole did not scream because she understood that the loudest scream was sometimes silence. She looked at Carlton, waiting for him to use the courage he used to convince patients before surgery to cut the skin, open the bone, reach the deepest part, and then sew it back together with the strongest thread. But Carlton averted his gaze to the two children, where duty was easier to talk about than guilt. He chose to stay in the safe zone of fatherhood. His wife did not humiliate Nicole. She did not need it. Her presence, that of the two children, spoke louder than any crime. Nicole felt a thin layer of cold dew cling to her skin, the dew of sobriety after a delusional hangover. If a man could hide an entire family, then what did all the promises he had made mean? In an instant, professional life, the fortress Nicole had built to shelter from emotional storms was threatened. Hospitals hated scandal. Donors hated it even more. Whispers turned into questions in the department. Did personal matters influence clinical decisions? Will she still be professional enough to be on the same surgical team as Carlton? Will she still have the presence of mind to stand through hours of surgery when her heart is heavy with bitterness? Nicole understands that in this harsh world, women have to be twice as clean to be trusted half as much. She chooses to throw herself into work like crazy, taking extra shifts, swapping shifts with colleagues, looking for complicated medical records as a way to punish herself. If her hands shake, she will see. If her eyes are blurry, she will know. If her heart skips a beat, she must learn to control it to the right rhythm. But the more she pushes herself, the more she sees the big question hanging over her head. Why does she fall into the cycle of being placed behind others, behind a family, behind an unfulfilled promise, behind an unnamed ambition, behind things that never belonged to her? Ted appears in the picture like an echo of the past that has not been closed. He is not an angel. They broke up because of the scratches that both of them contributed to creating. But he knew Nicole well enough to see that the woman was on the brink of a decision that would burn down everything she had built. He stood quietly on the far side of the story, both the one who had hurt her and the one who was helpless to see her hurt again for someone else. In a distorted perspective, Carlton's scandal could open a way back for Ted. But what held him back was not hope, but guilt. He had once left her behind something, now seeing history repeat itself in a more cruel form. The small media storm started with an anonymous post on the medical group's internal forum, mentioning overlapping relationships in the department, questioning the transparency of surgery allocation. There were no specific names, but everyone knew who the target was. A sponsor called the board of directors, tactfully reminding that the hospital's image should be associated with family values. A closed-door meeting was held. The department head, the human resources representative, and the tense faces. Nicole was told to self-assess for conflicts of interest and consider temporary transfer. The word temporary rang in her ears like a suspended sentence. No beginning, no end date. She signed the form because she was too tired to argue, but in her chest, a rage flared. Why would a man's lies drag a woman to the brink of death? Meanwhile, Carlton struggled with two emotions. To Nicole, he spoke with the trembling silence of a man who knew he had trampled on trust. To his wife, he wore the straightforward mask of a husband who had made mistakes but deserved forgiveness for complicated reasons. To his children, he turned into a warm wall, promising with his eyes that everything would be okay. But he forgot that children sense the changes that go beyond words. They hear the cracks in the rented Los Angeles apartment, where suitcases are unpacked, where the smell of laundry detergent is different, where the mother's sighs appear as regularly as clockwork. One night, the little girl asks her mother if Aunt Nicole is a bad person. The mother is silent for a long time, then simply says, "Adults sometimes do things that hurt each other, but that doesn't make them evil." That kind answer, when it reaches Nicole's ears through a friend who accidentally tells her, leaves her reeling. The woman who should hate her chooses not to add fuel to the fire. That kindness makes the tragedy worse, because it requires her to look directly at her own contribution to this spiral. Her eagerness to close her eyes to obvious questions about Carlton's past, the blind acceptance of someone starved for the feeling of being prioritized. Nicole's anger began to take shape. It wasn't just directed at Carlton or his wife. It was directed at herself, at the unjust structures that were gradually oppressing women like her, at the way systems of power always knew how to turn men's mistakes into family problems and women's wounds into workplace problems. She spent hours at night writing and deleting letters that she never sent. One to Carlton, asking him if there was ever a moment when he truly chose her as a destination rather than a destination. One to his wife, apologizing for her unintentional presence in their story. One to her 20-something self, reminding her that love isn't about being put on the back burner. Those letters piled up in the digital trash, but the unsent words were etched with a determination. Nicole wouldn't let someone else write her ending for her. Ted finds Nicole in the hallway, not asking sentimental questions, just standing close enough for her to know there's a witness to the silent storm tearing her apart. To her, Ted is a map of old mistakes. To his, she's a reminder of the damage he's done. His presence sharpens Nicole's choices. She can return to something that's proven broken. She can rush toward Carlton and snatch a love that lacks foundation. Or she can accept that the only door worth going through is the one that leads alone, even if it leads down a long, dark hallway. Nicole knew that if she kept quiet, this vicious cycle would keep her in a state of infinite passivity. If she spoke up, she would pay with her image with closed professional doors. She chose the third path, harder, lonelier. She submitted a factual report without embellishment or embellishment. She asked to be transferred to clinical research while the investigation was ongoing. She made an appointment to meet Carlton's wife, for the first and perhaps last time, to apologize, not to atone but to end the emotional chain. She declined all of Ted's dinner invitations, not out of hatred but because she didn't want to turn her current pain into a bridge back to the past. These decisions didn't make her less lonely, but they gave her back the right to write her own story. For Carlton, the revelation forced him to confront the long-dormant cracks in his marriage. He and his wife sat across from each other in their makeshift apartment. Between them, 2 children quietly drawing houses, trees, and a round sun. He realized that the so-called family could not stand if it was supported by repeated apologies and empty promises. He loved his children, that was beyond dispute. But his love for them did not exempt him from the responsibility to be honest with adults. For now, his wife had not made a decision to leave or stay. She only said one sentence, her voice as smooth as paper, but harder than iron. Do not let your children learn the first lesson of love is at the hospital. The committee meeting went through the same administrative ritual. Questions, evidence, risk analysis. No one was immediately suspended. There were no dramatic beheadings like on the front page. But a proposal for transparency rules was passed, forcing everyone to declare, forcing gloomy areas to become visible areas. It was a small victory, too small for the emotional storm Nicole had been through, but enough to let her know that her efforts had not vanished into thin air. She took the petition out of the conference room and stood on the railing overlooking the lobby, where patients, family members, nurses, and doctors mingled like a river with no beginning or end. She felt like part of that flow, not a rock being swept away, but a drop of water that knew how to find its own way. The drama of truth rarely ends at the same time for everyone. For Nicole, the end was when she returned to the lab, turned on the machine, opened the research file, and let her hands follow logic, letting her mind wander less around the unanswered questions. For Carlton, the end was when he sat down at the dinner table with his 2 children and answered their questions with simplicity. I did wrong, and I will learn to do right. For the wife, the curtain falls when she makes a marriage appointment, not to save something rotten, but to find out if there's enough good wood left to make a sturdy chair. For Ted, the curtain falls perhaps when he closes the file, looks at the pictures of the entire department on a picnic, and understands that sometimes love means standing back, giving the other person space to rebuild themselves. Children, innocent as all children, still run around the hospital halls, hold their father's hand when crossing the street, ask their mother why the sky in Los Angeles is a different blue. They will grow up and be forced to learn lessons adults don't want them to learn. That love requires honesty, that apologies have limits, that the second time is only worth it if the first is seen for what it was. Nicole watches them from afar, a slight softening in her eyes. Sometimes, to avoid becoming a scar in someone's life, one must learn to leave at the right time. And in the thin silence after a long day, Nicole stood on the hospital porch, the afternoon sunlight streaming golden streaks onto her blouse sleeves. She realized that the anger inside her had changed. No longer a fire that wanted to burn, but a charcoal stove that warmed her will. She chose a slow but clean future, a love that came late but was straightforward, a career that was not led by rumors. Maybe tomorrow another rumor would surface, maybe people would still call her name next to a broken love. But with the strange determination of someone who had hit rock bottom and decided to climb back up on her knees, Nicole knew she would get through, leaving behind sparkling pieces of glass. Not wounds, but the evidence of a soul that had stopped believing in the choices of others and started believing in its own.